Hello, and welcome to the Kennel Connection training video on setting up employees in Kennel Connection. This training video will go through the basics of entering employees and managing their times and schedules. To enter employees, we'll want to go to the Employees section. Go to the File tab at the top of Kennel Connection, and then in the Setup section, select Employees. When we open the Employees section, the General tab immediately opens up. This is where we will get a list of our employees currently in the system and where you can add new employees. To add a new employee, simply click New. The minimum requirement for saving an employee in the system is a first and last name and an ID and password. Once you've entered these 4 minimum requirements, you can click Save to save that employee and add additional information later. Below the employee name, you have the option to enter the employee's title, their address, and contact information. None of this is required in Kennel Connection and is merely there for your own records. The one exception would be the email ID if you want to email schedules directly to employees. You can then choose the type of employee, and if using a card swipe in conjunction with the time clock, you can enter a barcode for the employee here. Beneath the contact information, you'll see a line with services below. These are the services you can select to designate that the employee performs these services in your facility. Checking these boxes ensures that the employee will be selectable on that schedule when assigning services. There's also a default option, so if you have one employee that performs one service all the time, selecting the default will result in that employee being automatically selected whenever that service is scheduled. The selected employee can then be modified, but this will have that pop up first as a time-saving device for employees that perform the majority of a specific service. Also in this area, you'll see the options for inactive and administrative. If you wish to remove an employee from your lists but don't want to lose their contact information, you can simply select inactive. Then if we save that, the employee's information will still remain in the employee section. Their name will be highlighted in red, but they will no longer appear on any schedules in the program. This is especially important if you're using the Grooming module and want to remove an employee but still want to keep their connection to past performed services. We also have the option to mark an employee as administrative. This will allow the employee to access administrative areas if you're using login IDs and passwords. IDs and passwords are important for using the administrative login ID options, and I will point you to where those are turned on and how those work shortly. On the name list, you can also notice that if an employee is marked as administrative, their name is highlighted in green. And when you first install the Kennel Connection program, it comes with a default admin ID. This is a default admin ID in the system that remains there and has access to all areas of the program. You'll notice that the inactive and administrative options are grayed out. You cannot delete this item, you cannot mark it inactive, and you cannot undo it as administrative. You can change the login ID and password or the last name and first name if you like. They will always highlight here as blue, showing you that that is the main administrative ID. When using login IDs and passwords to restrict areas to Kennel Connection, you will want to set up your access rights for your individual employees. The Access Right tab takes us to where access rights are set. These are settings that will either allow or not allow employees to access certain areas of the program. The functions are broken up into separate categories. We have a general section for things like the list section, vendor setup, category setup in the inventory section, credit card information, being able to access that, and gift cards and certificates. Specifically for modules, we have the option to turn on or off the ability to add, modify, or delete reservations in specific modules. And we can also control whether or not an employee is allowed to adjust package days on the client card or the pet card. In the inventory section, we can specifically control the ability to enter the inventory section, to add inventory, modify it, or delete it. The reports section can be restricted by specific areas. So you can restrict access to the boarding reports, grooming reports, daycare reports, training reports, the general reports, revenue reports, list reports, pet sitting reports, and special services reports. You do not have the ability to restrict access to specific reports, but only entire report categories. For invoices, you can restrict the ability to add invoices in the system, to modify them, delete them, to view the previous one, or to process returns. For receipts, you can restrict the ability to add, modify, or delete them, create prepayments or deposits, issue refunds, view previous receipts, batch out your credit card payments at the end of the day, open the cash drawer, or run the closeout report. At the bottom, we can control whether or not an employee is able to add, modify, or delete pet cards, client cards, time cards, or employee information. And then at the far right, we can also control the employee's ability to use the QuickBooks Direct Sync or to activate BCS Live. BCS Live is used when you're using the Kennel Connection smartphone app or the online reservation real time. In setting up the access rights, you can choose access rights individually. As a time-saving device, we also have the option to select all or deselect all. So you can select all items here and then turn off the ones you don't want them to be able to do. You can also create specific security levels for different positions in your facility. To do so, you'll go to the upper left-hand corner where it says Set up Security Levels. Here you can create named security levels with preset access rights. So in this case here I have one for cashiers, one for groomers, and one for trainers. When these are set up, you can select the access rights for that specific level by going to Set Level and selecting the level you wish to set. Once you set that level, you can also fine-tune that to add additional items or remove them for that employee. And I'm going to make this employee administrative as I go in to demonstrate how to use the login ID and password. To turn on login IDs and passwords in Kennel Connection, you'll want to go to the File tab, and then in the Setup section, select System Options. Under the Global tab and System Options, you'll want to turn on Use Startup Password and Security Features and Use Administration Login. If you look at the top of the screen, you'll notice that once I apply those two options, the option Login As appears in the Setup section of the File tab. Clicking this will allow us to log in as an employee or as the administrator using the ID and password. Once an employee is logged in, their name will appear at the bottom of Kennel Connection between the time and the word ready. So you can always look at the screen to see who is logged in at any given time. Whenever an employee is going to log out of the system, they should just click Login As and leave the login ID up for the next employee to type in their name. With the administrative access rights set, certain areas will require an administrative login ID in order to access it. So if we try to go back into the employee section, for example, it'll ask for an administrative login. This is not changing the person who is currently logged into Kennel Connection, but is merely giving permission for them to access this section. In addition to the access rights and being able to control what your employees can or cannot do in the program, another added benefit of using the login IDs and passwords is the ability to track transactions in the system. If we go to the Utilities tab at the top of Kennel Connection and select Audit Trail, which again is administratively protected, we'll have the Audit Trail, which will track any transactions that take place in the system. When login IDs are turned off, the Audit Trail only records deleted transactions. But when the login IDs are turned on, any transaction that takes place in Kennel Connection, an addition, a modification, a deletion, will be recorded here, including the date, the module it occurred in, what the action was, and the user that signed in. On the right-hand side, you also find additional information as well, including customer names, invoice numbers, etc. Next in the employee setup are the time cards. If you're using the time clock in Kennel Connection for employees to punch in and out, the time card section is where you can track, modify, add, or delete punch-ins and punch-outs. To use the time clock feature in Kennel Connection, you'll go to either the Accounting tab, where there's an icon for the time clock, or to the quick access bar at the very top of Kennel Connection, where there's also a time clock icon. Clicking either of these will open up the time clock. Here the employee will select their name, choose whether they are clocking in or clocking out, and then click Punch. You can also require a login ID and password for using the time clock by going to the System Options section again, and selecting Enable Login on Time Clock for time calculations. Then when an employee selects their name and clicks Punch, they'll be asked to enter their ID and password. Employees can also use the hours worked option to track their previous and current punches. So if an employee doesn't remember whether they punched in or out today, they can select current or previous and click Calculate. And it will list the punches in and out for either this week or the previous week. Back in the employee section, we can see the times entered here on the punch clock. From the time card tab, you have the ability to add additional punches. If an employee forgot to punch in and you want to enter them in or punch out, entering the date and time of either the in and or the out, the reason for it, any additional notes you want, and you can enter the name of the person creating this additional punch. We can also select a punch and click Modify if we need to change any of the information in here. Oh, and then I forgot to change that to AM. There we go. You'll notice at the bottom of the right-hand corner, we have the time. Kennel Connection will calculate the amount of hours worked based on the punch in and punch out for this week of payroll. Kennel Connection does not calculate payroll, but it does allow you to track time worked so you can enter that information into whatever payroll service you are currently using. We also have the adjust option that allows you to enter an unpaid lunch period or something similar to that in the middle of a punch in and punch out. For example, if I choose this time period and click adjust, the adjustment time I can have at 30 minutes instead at noon, and we can put a reason for this as well. So if an employee forgot to punch out for lunch, for example, I adjust the time for 30 minutes. At 12 noon, I click OK. Kennel Connection adds a 30-minute time break between 12 p.m. and 12:30 and moves down for the second half of that day. You'll now notice that the time worked at the bottom is also decreased by 30 minutes. While in the time card section, we have the ability to check previous time cards by going to that week ending date, or we can go back and forth using previous and next. The week ending date can be set in the System Options section on the General tab. Next, we have Payroll Info. Here's where we enter information for payroll for the employee. The pay method, commission, flat rate, hourly, or salary. Frequency, biweekly, monthly, or weekly. And hours per pay period. Once again, Kennel Connection does not calculate payroll, so this information is not used in the system, but is here for your reference. You can also enter a hired and termination date for an employee. And if you are restricting groom services based on individual employees, you'll enter the maximum number of groom services here. The Payroll Info tab is also where you'll set up commissions for the employees. For further information on setting up commissions for employees and for services or items in Kennel Connection, please refer to our training video specifically on setting up and tracking commissions. The next tab is the Schedule tab. Here is where you can create schedules for your employees. To create a schedule for an employee, click the Add button. Select the period ending date, and then enter the in and out times. The schedule section has a first shift and second shift if you are scheduling lunch breaks or multiple shifts in the same day. If you are not entering multiple shifts in the same day or including a punch out and punch in for a lunch break or something else, just use the first shift section. As you're entering the hours for your employee, you can click the Calculate Time button here. This will tell you how much time you have scheduled for that employee while you're creating the schedule. Once we finish creating the schedule, we can click OK. The schedule is now saved in the system. As a time-saving device, you don't have to create each weekly schedule new. You can copy a previous weekly schedule to a different day. So for example, I'm going to create next week's schedule, and it's going to be very similar to this week's. So I'm going to select this week's schedule and click copy. I'm then going to select the week ending date that I'm copying to. And it's now created that week's schedule using the exact same information. I can then go in there and modify that if there are any differences between the two. Once we've created the schedules, we can print the schedules from here, or we can email them directly to the employee. Finally, in the Employee section, there's a Notes tab. This is just a generic section to enter notes for the employees that you may want to enter and have on file. This has been the training video for setting up employees in Kennel Connection. We've gone over entering new employees, setting up their access rights, using the Timecard function, entering payroll information, and entering and managing schedules. Once again, for further information regarding setting up commissions for employees in Kennel Connection, please check out our specific training video on setting up and tracking commissions for employees. If you have any further questions regarding the employee setup section, please feel free to contact the training department at Blue Crystal Software. You can contact me directly in the training department by calling 888-486-4343 and dialing extension 307, or you can email the training department at training@bluecrystalsoftware.com.